The Down to Business podcast is sponsored and produced by Rex Real Estate. Folks, there is no longer any reason you should be paying 6% commission to a real estate agent to sell your home. Rex sells homes for the lowest fee in the industry, period, at 2% total. That saves consumers thousands of dollars per transaction. With Rex, you get a full service team backed by technology. Rex doesn't market homes the way traditional agents do. They use big data and machine learning to attract hundreds of qualified buyers directly to your home the moment it goes on the market. Get started now by visiting rexhome.com. This is the Down to Business podcast. I am your host, Eric Rothman. Thank you for joining me for episode number 3. Today, an interview with Diana Nelson, who is the chair of the Carlson Company, a company that has been in her family since 1938. They're just celebrating their 80th year as a family-run business, and they've evolved over time quite a bit through the years. They were once the owners of the Radisson hotel chains, TGI Fridays restaurants, and now a global travel company that is operating in over 150 different countries and territories throughout the world. Really enjoyed talking to Diana. One of the things we got into that she really had some interesting thoughts on was the transition of a family-owned company from one generation to the next. A lot of times you hear about a family business being passed on from one generation to another, and things don't typically go very well. This is a company that in Carlson that started as the Gold Bond Stamp Company in Minneapolis, Minnesota in 1938, and now has evolved to one of the world's biggest travel companies. And through the different family members that have run the business, they've been able to stay successful for now 8 decades. Very impressive. It was really great to talk to Diana, and we hope you enjoy the conversation as well. And without further ado, Diana Nelson. I would love to kind of hear the brief origin story of Carlson, because I think it's pretty interesting.
Yeah. So Carlson was started in 1938 by my grandfather, Kurt Carlson. And he was first generation. He was second generation. His father came to the U.S. when he was 2. He was one of 5 kids. He was the middle child. And we think some of his entrepreneurial skills and his business intensity came from trying to distinguish himself as the middle child and have attention. And he had a paper route when he was younger. He got his older brothers to work for him so he could expand his route. And so there was an early business interest with him. And after college, he went to work for Procter & Gamble as a salesman. And there, again, he was very goal-oriented. He put a little piece of paper in his wallet that said $50 a week, and he had that goal of what he wanted his target to be. And he realized there he distinguished himself as a salesman, but realized that he wanted to be able to leverage his investment of his time and talent on a broader base and as an entrepreneur. So really, in the 30s, which was a tough time in the U.S., he decided he was going to start a savings stamp business, and he started Gold Bond Stamp Company. He had a very hard time getting a bank loan. He ended up getting a loan from his father-in-law and a small, couple $100 loan, and started the stamp business. And it took off, and so we're now almost 80, and part of his vision, I would say almost from the time that he started his business, is that he wanted a business legacy. He wanted something that would be sustained over generations, and he made a lot of decisions in his business to try and build it to a scale that would be sustainable.
And so for a company that's been in your family for 80 years, do you remember when you kind of became cognizant of what was going on, and when you started becoming involved and understanding kind of what the family business was?
The family business was very enmeshed with family. And so my grandfather and grandmother had 2 daughters, my mom, Marilyn, and her sister, Barbie. And the company was born the year before my mother. So they really all grew up together. And my mother and aunt remember the time that capital was incredibly precious. And when they would go out to dinner at a restaurant, they wouldn't have dessert because, the capital was going back into growing the business. And for me and my siblings and cousins, because there were 8 of us in the family and the 3rd generation, we grew up aware that the company, which we called it at that point, was really a big part of our whole family's life. And at different points, my uncle became CEO. My mother was CEO. There were many, many family brunches, and we all laugh about them now, where my grandfather would gather all the kids around and tell us the stories of shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations, and how dangerous it was that the 3rd generation would blow everything. and it was really a form of sort of more than acculturation. I think it was a bit of brainwashing to the fact that we weren't going to be the ones to blow it. And we would study with him. He would come up with case studies just over family meals of, there's this company in Japan that's been in the soy sauce business for hundreds of years, and we'd hear about the great successes and we'd hear about the great failures and be admonished not to be one of those failures.
It's interesting you bring that up. That was going to be one of my questions anyway, but now that you bring it up in terms of how cognizant your grandfather was of the passing of a business from generation to generation, you read so often, especially in small businesses, not necessarily in big, conglomerates, but in small businesses especially, where it's started by a grandfather or a dad or a mom, and the 2nd generation maybe just not as interested in it. They have different passions. Was it something that, when you were growing up and when you were learning about the company, that you could picture yourself being a part of it? Was that kind of your grandfather's idea, was making sure you saw yourself as part of the company, so you took ownership in it as well as he did?
I think he wanted to have his family all feel part of it in the sense that they would be champions for it. I think he worried about the idea that if everyone wanted to work there and if everyone wanted to be the boss or the CEO, that would be a problem, and it would be a problem for family harmony and family unity. And he really cared about the family sticking together above all. So he wanted supportive interest. And to tell you the truth, he didn't really have to sell the interest in the business because it was a really interesting business. It started with a stamp company and gold bond stamps, and you may remember, or you may be too young to remember, but S&H Green Stamps was another successful stamp company, and it was the early form of loyalty programs, things that then became airline frequent flyer miles and all the kinds of reward programs that we see today. Gold bond stamps were a form of loyalty program, and people would lick their savings stamps, put them in a little book, and then trade them in for, a TV or furniture, depending how long you saved, you would have bigger products to cash in your stamps for. But by the time that I was in my teens, the stamp business had really sort of started to fade in the U.S. I think, the recession in the 70s, the issues with, gas stations were a big client for stamps, and some of the pricing around gasoline at that point made the stamp business fade a bit. And while it still had legs in Japan, he began to reinvest cash into other businesses. The year before I was born, he invested in a hotel, one hotel in downtown Minneapolis. And he found he really liked that business. And so between 1961 and 2014, that grew to be a global business. And we had 1,400 hotels around the world. We were the 9th largest hotel company in the world. We also bought TGI Fridays restaurants, and And when my grandfather bought that company, there were 12 restaurants. And that also was over 1,000 restaurants by the time that we sold that business. And it was everywhere from Europe to Libya. It had, really this American and Americana brand had a lot of appeal around the world. So selling interest in the business wasn't really needed because we had some amazing consumer platforms that we could experience, take part in. And for our family, one of the reasons that we've loved business, and I think that our family is still really committed to business. We're going to be 80 next year, but there's a unified sense that we want to get to 100 and beyond. One of the reasons is that business gives you real connections to people in the world. You have connections to people who are working with you, the employees and their lives. You have a connection to creating jobs and opportunity for other families, not just your own. You have an interest in other companies that's more than you would have as a tourist. You're going in and saying, how do these economies work? How do the politics in this country impact a potential business there? So for us, we've always felt that business made the world more interesting. And I think I felt that from being a young child. And I would say that for my siblings and cousins, it was the same. It was pretty fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds, obviously, your grandfather was a visionary in being able to see one hotel, 12 restaurants, and see to what they became. Right. And obviously, over the course of decades and generations, and you talked about, it's a great thing that everybody in your family is involved and interested and is easily sold. But then it can kind of, on the flip side of that, when you have so many people and opinion and everybody feels like that kind of ownership stake in it in different capacities, is there a special type of navigation you have to go through when it's a family business?
There is a really special element of navigation, and it's tough sometimes. When I left business school, I thought long and hard about going to work in the business, and I decided I was very, very close to my family, and I wasn't sure that I was willing to take the risk of what it would feel like to work for my mother or uncle or kind of enmesh personal life and work life. And it took me years of being far away from the business before I felt that I was willing to navigate those two elements of life in a unified way. I think you have to be very, very careful and conscious and planful in a family business. That for our family, I think what's really made it successful is that we've prioritized the family. And it doesn't mean the business isn't huge and important and that we're not spending far more time as a family working together in many ways than we are playing together. We have a huge responsibility. There's lots of meetings, lots of family forums and governance entities. But above all, we cherish the family relationship first. So if you start with that, I think that can really help inform how you go about decision making in a family business. And for me, when I became chair of the board of our company in 2013, I soon realized that there was a lot more time that needed to be spent making sure that everyone's voice was heard, and that we might all, in the family have very different points of view. And in the end, we would end up coming to a decision, and we have independent board members as well on our board, so it's not just family members. We might not have a decision that would be what some family members might have advocated for coming in, but if we had a respectful process that really allowed for people to take the time to have the analysis, to have the discussion and the data that was required to align us, that was a really important, not just important, essential investment. We had to take that time and make sure our process was inclusive.
Yeah. I'd love to kind of hear a little bit more about the thought process you had when you were leaving college. I know because you spent quite a bit of your career in the advertising world, correct?
Advertising and marketing. Yes.
So when you're leaving college, and obviously you have this great company that your family's built and they're involved in, and at the same time you want to be your own person, you want to kind of carve your own path. Walk me through just a little bit what kind of went into that decision, and did you always think that you would wind up back at Carlson? Was there kind of a long-term plan, or was it more at the time of when you were kind of leaving college, just the idea of doing something different and kind of separating that business and personal and doing something a little bit on your own?
I would say that one of the biggest challenges that I see for families, particularly like ours, my kids, some of whom have just graduated from college, this has been around for 80 years. They've seen it in their great-grandparents, grandparents' lives, parents' lives. And one of the most important things to do when you're leaving college, for me and for my kids, is to figure out what do you really care about, and to know yourself and navigate your own values. So it's important to separate an individual identity from a collective one, but that's easier said than done. And to some degree, there is no way that we're all a product of our context and our family context. For me, I think the fact that there was an exciting platform within the family did inform my choices. I was an art history major at Harvard as an undergrad. I hadn't planned to be an art history major, but I took one course. I loved it, and it was a small department with a lot of attention from professors, so I enjoyed that field. But when I graduated, having business in the family really led me to say, I'm not sure I want to pursue an art field, and one that I would never have the chance to contribute to the family business. And I went into advertising and marketing, and that was a place that had a creative element and creative skills. I was on the business side, but I liked creative aspects of business. But it also put me on a path to go to business school and then be able to contribute. I would say that it took me many more years to figure out whether I wanted to really embrace spending most of my time in the family business setting. And the timing was wonderful for me when it was really 2003 when I began as a board member, and then in 2013 became chair of the board. So by that point, I felt like I had clarity around the fact that I'd been in enough other places, in jobs, in boards, that I felt very clear that I could add value. And I think my advice to people who might be thinking about a quandary like this, whether they go into family business or following a parent's footsteps as a doctor or lawyer, some other path, is to really try and separate yourself and find some independent forums to test out your interests, your passions, your abilities, prove yourself, because it can be tough to push back against any boss or any set of shareholders if you're running a company. And the more conviction that you can gain by your own life experience, the better you'll be able to engage with your family or other people that you need to in that way.
How involved were you, even when you were on the outside, not necessarily working directly for the company, but kind of understanding the difficulties and changes that the company was either foreseeing or going through to keep its head above water and to last for as long as it has?
I would say that the pace of change in the last 10 years has been unprecedented, not just for our company, but companies across the world. And I don't think we paid a lot of attention to change management. In the earlier decades of our company, we paid attention to growth and expansion. Right. But the idea of business models changing as quickly as they are, of customers changing as quickly as they are, that wasn't really part of our early experience. And for me, when I became chair, it was right at the time that the pace of change had accelerated. And we had a conflict because part of what gives you success as a multi-generational family company is a long-term perspective. The fact that you're not reacting to quarterly shareholder calls for a public company. And we had felt that our competitive advantage was that we could take the long view. And I think that we had people in our company, leaders and long-term employees, who liked the stability, and they liked the fact that we weren't, kind of at the mercy of what might be trendy in the market or the latest worry. That strength also became a weakness, or a potential weakness for us in the last decade, because we really needed to shift our mindset to embrace change. We really needed to shift our employees to not focus as much on the insular, we're a private company and we can be separate from the world, and have them out there learning and looking at what's happening in technology. How can we, disintermediate ourselves before other people disintermediate us? And one of the things that we found is there are some people for whom change is really exciting, and others for whom it's really difficult. And we really needed to emphasize change and to help people understand that our culture was changing, and we needed our most senior leaders to be people who embraced change and could lead others through change. So I don't think that we prepared for it in a conscious way. It came upon us and we had to scramble a bit to retool. But one of the things that I found really helpful with our family shareholder group is to go back to our roots, and to go back to the fact that in our original days, we were called the Gold Bond Stamp Company. By the time that the company was 30 years old to 40 years old, the stamp company was gone. We didn't even really have a chance to, change and evolve that business. It was just gone, and we had to have new businesses. So really, in our heritage, in our DNA, we had constant evolution in our businesses. It had just felt more gradual, and it didn't feel that there was the need to be as conscious as we've had to be in the last few years. And the hardest thing that we've had to do and change in the last few years is we've had to sell some businesses that we loved. And the hotel business was one that all of us grew up in. It's a consumer-facing business, so we stayed in hotels around the world. We had a lot of pride in that business, and still do have pride in the brands, and they're out there growing and thriving. But we were in a position in the market where we were 9th largest globally, but there was massive consolidation and a huge impact of technology, where companies like Expedia were doing more and more of the bookings and taking the margin away from hotels to book their own hotel rooms. And we found ourselves as a family company looking for our 100th anniversary, realizing that the hotel business wasn't one that matched the kind of profile that we needed. So it took us 3.5 years to really think it through and just make the decision and gain that alignment across the entire management team and the enterprise, and to feel that we could make the transition in a respectful way with our employees. But I was very proud, because to me that said that our family was willing to work together in hard times, not just in the glory times of a business with growth, but really the times when you have to dig deep and say, we need to do some hard things to sustain this and have the vision that my grandfather had really be sustained over the next generation.
So it's interesting. So the decision when you're deciding as a family to sell the hotel business, obviously that 3.5 years, it's a long time to make that decision. Was there ever a moment where you were like, you know what? Screw this. We're going to stay here. We're going to beat these guys that are coming after us. And how did you ultimately get away from that?
That is such a good question. And absolutely, our family has a credo, and it's our values and all our employees know the credo, and it's become a real touchstone for all of us. And I'll share the whole credo,
Sure.
and the last line pertains to your question. So the Carlson credo is, whatever you do, do with integrity. Wherever you go, go as a leader. Whomever you serve, serve with caring. Whenever you dream, dream with your all, and never, ever give up. So never, ever give up is probably the line of the credo that we talk about the most. And it's the line that we'll talk about with our kids when they have a hard day at school, or they don't want to, they feel like their sports team isn't performing. Never, ever give up is a great piece of life advice that, connects you to grit and persistence and competitiveness. So yes, part of our instinct was to say, we can't give up. We really need to double down. We want to stay here. And we did. And that's why I think it took 3.5 years, because we really looked hard to say, how could we win? What could we do? And the business was performing well. And so it was not a place where we had given up on it on a day-to-day basis, but one where we had to be really disciplined about what was possible. So yes, we absolutely had those moments when we were saying we'll never, ever give up.
Well, I mean, with that, I think it has to also go back to looking forward to the next generation, because like you said, it wasn't like the business was failing. It was a successful business. And I'm sure for as long as you wanted to stay in it in your lifetime, your brothers and sisters, it probably would have stayed that way.
Yes.
Were you looking at it from the sense of, we could double down and I'd be fine and I would be happy, but maybe my children and my grandchildren, who I hope 20 years from now, 40 years from now are running this business, would probably be worse off because of it?
Yes, and I have two stories along those lines. One was when we were really wrestling with this. We have both family and independent board members, and one of our independent board members, pointed out that part of what he thought his responsibility is to look forward to the next generation, and that's different than board service for a lot of public company boards. But he said, I'm worried about what we might be handing over to that next generation. And one of my sons had what I thought was a great line when, hearing about, because we shared this with the broader family and younger members of the family who wouldn't have been in the boardroom making the decision, but we wanted to share the news with them before it would be public. And he really understood the risks and where things could have been, but felt nostalgia and sadness about the business. And his line was, well, I think it's better to be bittersweet than just bitter. And that kind of encapsulated, because if you hold on to something too long and consolidation goes on around you and you miss the moment to send your brands and the people who work in them into a bigger platform, then that could be a bitter ending. So it was bittersweet.
It's pretty wise.
Yeah, very.
So since you guys made that decision to move away from the hotel business and shift to where you're at now, what has that been like in that transition? And I know you mentioned that throughout the course of the history of the company, you guys have transitioned quite a bit to a few different types of businesses, but never, it sounds like, in such a compact period of time. What was that like, being a leader of a business and kind of shuffling it into almost a new generation of thinking and a new generation of what you were trying to do as a company?
Yes. Well, what's been exciting is that we have two main areas of focus right now. One is our travel business, Carlson Wagon Travel, or CWT. And we are the largest travel management company in the world. And that is, we do business-to-business travel for large corporate accounts. It's moving hundreds of thousands of people around the globe, dealing with issues of of security, of sort of very customized travel operations. So we have energy clients who need to get people on and off of oil rigs and need a very specialized kind of travel service and planning. And within the travel business, like the hotel business, technology has become a greater and greater part of the mix. And right now we have a new CEO in that business, someone named Kurt Eckert, who came from both a travel and technology background. And JP Morgan was our partner in that business. They own 45%. We bought them out, and we've been doubling down on that business and looking at how technology can be transformative there. And so it's really exciting to be able to focus on change in that platform and look more at the customer experience, the user experience, to be in a business that we've been in for a long time, but one where technology is and data analytics, much like the tools that Rex is using, are huge tools for us. So we have a business that we've been in a long time, but that we're completely transforming. And then on the other side, we've decided to take part of our proceeds from the hotel business and go back to our roots as business builders and really look for direct investments in some of those small operating platforms that may not be anywhere the scale of the kind of business that we've had in our portfolio recently, but we've had a real track record of being able to grow with great leaders and great concepts. So our family is absolutely committed to remaining in business, to operating business, to both creating jobs and using business as a real platform to have philanthropic impact and impact on issues we care about. So we've now got a large global platform that we're digging deeper on, and then these seeds of things that hopefully in the next generation they can talk about how they've grown and succeeded.
And as the business has changed and shifted in terms of the model and what you're serving, how have you changed with it as a business person? I imagine that, growing up and understanding a business one way and then jumping into it later in your career and realizing we need to change this, probably you have to go back a little bit and change your mindset of thinking, or at least reanalyze kind of the way you look at these problems and approach future success.
Yes. I think the biggest way that I've changed is I think, in school we're all programmed to some degree to have grades and have tests, and you have the right answer and you develop the right thesis. And even, the first strategy meeting that I led as board chair, the CEO of our business and I went in with a very aligned view of what we were going to do in a specific plan. And in the board meeting, the board kind of sparked to something else, and we did a collective pivot. And for a minute I panicked, like, wait, we had the answer and we've been moving along a direction with a particular business, toward an outcome. And the biggest thing I've learned is not to be rigid about the idea of a right answer. And I don't mean not to be decisive when you decide what to do. Of course, as a leader, you need to be willing to make some hard calls and say when we're done discussing things. But the biggest thing that I've learned, and I think is really essential with the pace of change that we have in today's world, is not to be locked into one way of doing things or one outcome, because we have so much data that's available now. There are so many people that are able to approach problems from different vantage points, that the most important thing I think to feel right about is that you have the right process to surface ideas and build consensus, but don't start the process thinking that have the end in mind.
There doesn't really seem to be an end in sight, and that's probably a good thing. This has been great. I really appreciate you taking a few minutes. I know it's been a long day, but thank you so much.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
So there you have it, another episode of Down to Business in the books. Want to thank Diana Nelson for joining me this week for our conversation. Really great insight to what her family has had to deal with running a family-owned business for 8 decades and seeing it thrive from generation to generation now to what it is today as one of the global leaders in the travel industry. So we thank Diana, we thank you for listening, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Down to Business.